Imagine a world where every touch of a scalpel meant unbearable torture, where the only way to silence a patient's screams was to tie them firmly to the table, where death was as common a visitor in the operating room as the surgeon himself. Such was medicine for millennia. But in the late 18th century, as the West was just beginning its journey toward a scientific understanding of pain, a man lived in distant Japan. His name was Seishu Hanaoka. He was not merely a surgeon, he was a visionary. He challenged humanity's fundamental problem, suffering, and he succeeded. In the early 19th century, decades before William Morton demonstrated ether anesthesia in Boston, Hanaoka was already performing complex surgeries, immersing his patients in a deep, painless sleep. He created the world's first general anesthetic, a revolutionary achievement that changed surgery forever. This was no accident. It was not a sudden epiphany. We are accustomed to believing in myths about great discoveries, in brilliant breakthroughs, epiphanies, and a single flash of light that suddenly illuminates the path. We expect stories of light bulbs, apples, and eureka. But the true history of science is not instantaneous enlightenment. It is years of relentless effort. It is thousands of attempts. It is endless mistakes. It is a path paved with patience, sacrifices, and an unwavering belief in the impossible. This is precisely the kind of story that awaits us. The story of Seishu Hanaoka. For millennia, humanity faced the inevitable. Pain was inflicted not only by disease, but also by the treatment itself. Physicians relied on ancient texts, believing in the balance of bodily fluids. Blood, phlegm, bile, any imbalance was considered the cause of illness. Diagnoses were made based on pulse, urine, and skin color. The methods were as archaic as the understanding of the human body's functions. Surgery was an act of desperation. Amputating a limb took minutes, but the pain was unimaginable. To stop bleeding, wounds were cauterized with red-hot irons or doused with boiling oil. This didn't save lives, it only added to the torment. Infections were an invisible enemy. Pus, flowing from wounds, was considered laudable. Its appearance was welcomed, without understanding that it was a harbinger of sepsis, gangrene, and inevitable death. Hygiene was non-existent. Instruments transmitted diseases. A surgeon's hands, unwashed after dissecting a corpse, would immediately touch a living patient. Every incision was a deadly lottery. This was an era where knowledge of the human body was just beginning to emerge, and the fear of the scalpel was stronger than the fear of the disease itself. But one man refused to accept this reality. Seishu Hanaoka was born in 1765 in the tiny village of Hirata, in Ki Province. His family, the Hanaokas, had served as physicians in these lands for centuries, passing down knowledge from generation to generation. Young Seishu grew up absorbing the wisdom of Eastern medicine, studying ancient texts and traditional healing methods. However, his inquisitive mind could not be content with merely the past. At the age of 25, he traveled to Kyoto, then a hub of advanced knowledge. There, Hanaoka mastered Rangaku, Dutch learning, a window to the Western world opened through limited contact with European traders. Through Dutch books and translations, he gained access to knowledge unprecedented in Japan at that time: Western anatomy, surgery, and pharmacology. This gave him a unique advantage. He viewed medicine from both sides, East and West, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each. Upon returning home, Hanaoka opened his own clinic. Every day, he confronted what had been considered inevitable for millennia: the screams of patients writhing in agony. He saw how powerless even the most skilled methods of his time were, how cauterizing wounds intended to stop bleeding only multiplied the agony, how even the fastest surgeon could not spare a person the horror of conscious awareness, the torment that lasted every second of the operation. This experience, this daily encounter with boundless pain, became his personal battle. He could not accept a world where healing demanded such sacrifices. He was unwilling to accept the role of an executioner, even if he was saving lives. He believed there had to be a way to perform surgery not only effectively, but also mercifully. This deep conviction, this internal challenge, compelled him to seek a path that no one before him had dared to tread. His deep conviction, this internal challenge, compelled him to seek a path that no one before him had dared to tread. And Hanaoka didn't just search, he acted. He knew that for millennia, people had tried to dull pain. Ancient Chinese texts described a legendary remedy, mafesin, capable of inducing a deep sleep. But its exact recipe was lost, and its efficacy seemed like a myth. Seishu Hanaoka took this myth and transformed it into science. He combined knowledge from East and West. He studied hundreds of plants, analyzing their properties and effects on the body. He sought components capable of inducing stupor without causing death. Year after year, he experimented. His own clinic served as his laboratory. He prepared decoctions, extracts, and powders. He administered them to animals, dogs, cats. He meticulously recorded every reaction, dosage, onset time of sleep, its depth, side effects, and duration of awakening. Hundreds of attempts ended in failure. Many animals died. But Hanaoka did not give up. He was obsessed with the idea that compassion must become a part of surgery. He refined his compound of 6 plants, aconite, datura, angelica, ginseng, mushroom, and hanaokite, to near perfection. He named it Tsusensan. Now came the crucial, riskiest step, human trials. At a time when even the simplest operations were torture and surgical instruments were steeped in blood, Hanaoka encountered another seemingly intractable case. A patient, Aya, suffered from a massive, deeply rooted breast tumor. The operation would be extremely complex and painful. Traditional cauterization with red-hot oil or iron would not only be agonizing, but also ineffective for such a large area. All conventional pain suppression methods had been exhausted. Their oil had run out. Hanaoka understood either he would apply his experimental Tsusensan, or Aya was doomed to unbearable suffering and most likely death. The choice was made. In 1805, surrounded by his students, Seishu Hanaoka began the first operation in history under general anesthesia. Aya drank the Tsusensan decoction. The minutes stretched agonizingly long. The students, holding their breath, watched for a reaction. First, the patient felt numbness, then dizziness. Her breathing became deep and steady. Her body relaxed. She sank into a deep, peaceful sleep. Hanaoka checked her pupils, pulse, and reaction to touch. She did not respond. Silence fell. For the first time in history, a surgical scalpel could work without screams, without struggle, without terror in the patient's eyes. Hanaoka began to operate. He removed the tumor, working methodically, without haste, with unprecedented precision. The operation was successful. A few hours later, Aya awoke. She was weak, but remembered no pain. She remembered neither the scalpel nor the suffering. The world of medicine had changed forever. Aya's operation was a triumph, but for Hanaoka, it was just the beginning. He didn't rest on a single success. His genius lay not only in the discovery, but also in his systematic approach. He understood that for a discovery to become a revolution, it had to be reproducible. It had to be accessible to others. He began to systematize his knowledge. Every detail, every nuance of Tsusensan's application, dosage, duration of effect, reaction of different patients, everything was meticulously documented. He didn't just record data, he analyzed it, identifying patterns. If something went wrong, he didn't dismiss it as coincidence. He sought the cause. He modified components, proportions, and administration methods. It was a continuous cycle of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and correction. His clinic became a true school, Students flocked from all over Japan to learn from his unique experience. Hanaoka did not hide his methods. He taught them not only how to remove tumors or perform amputations, but also the most crucial skill, how to induce a healing sleep in patients. He didn't just share the Tsusensan recipe, he imparted the principles of empirical medicine. He taught them to observe, record, and analyze. He taught them not to fear mistakes, but to learn from them. Hanaoka also understood the importance of surgical instruments. Surgery demanded precision. He didn't wait for others to create the necessary tools, he invented them himself. New scalpels, clamps, and forceps. Each instrument was designed with the specific needs of anesthetized operations in mind, allowing the surgeon to work longer and more precisely. These instruments, like his knowledge, spread among his students, becoming part of a new, more humane surgery. He didn't just treat, he created a system. He wrote books and manuals in Japanese, making Western knowledge and his own discoveries accessible to a wide range of physicians in Japan. This was revolutionary. While European scientists published in Latin or other European languages, Hanaoka broke down barriers, translating the complex into the understandable, the distant into the familiar. His approach was deeply pragmatic. He did not rely on myths or ancient dogmas. He trusted only what he saw with his own eyes, what he could measure and replicate. He was a living embodiment of the scientific method long before it became widely accepted in Western medicine. This allowed him not only to make a single discovery, but also to lay the foundation for an entirely new era in surgery, one based on knowledge, not suffering. Hanaoka's triumph did not go unnoticed, but his methods, his incredible successes, evoked not only admiration, they also generated deep suspicion. Respected physicians from influential schools, guardians of ancient dogmas, viewed Hanaoka with distrust. His Tsusensan, this decoction that induced unconsciousness, seemed unnatural to them, alien, dangerous. "This isn't medicine, it's sorcery," they whispered. "He's interfering with the divine order." How could one trust a man who plunged people into a state resembling death? The ancient texts upon which their practice was founded made no mention of such a sleep. They predicted disaster. They claimed patients would die from these poisonous herbs. The operations themselves, performed without the patient's awareness of pain, seemed blasphemous to them. Rumors spread. Hanaoka was called a charlatan. He was accused of heresy, of attempting to deceive nature. Some tried to ban his practice. They wrote denunciations to local authorities, discouraging potential students and patients. But Hanaoka was not alone. He was defended by those who saw the real evidence of his genius. Local daimyo, influential feudal lords, were pragmatists. They were not interested in theoretical disputes or centuries-old dogmas. They were interested in surviving patients. They saw how people, condemned to unbearable torment, returned to life without suffering. These lords provided him with land for cultivating rare plants, necessary resources, and, most importantly, protection from attacks. Their patronage was not merely a favor, it was a shield that allowed Hanaoka to continue his work despite waves of disapproval. News of the miraculous sleep spread throughout the provinces. Despite all obstacles, his fame grew. Patients, desperate for help, traveled hundreds of kilometers to reach his clinic. They trusted not dogmas, but results. And this trust, bolstered by the support of the powerful, allowed Seishu Hanaoka to stand firm against a conservative world unwilling to accept his discoveries. Whispers of sorcery and blasphemy continued, but they shattered against an insurmountable force, the living testimony of his patients. Hanaoka did not engage in verbal battles. He responded with actions. Every successful operation, every patient who awoke without pain, was undeniable proof of his method's validity. He performed over 150 breast cancer removals, an incredible number for that era, each fraught with immense risk. Hundreds of amputations, thousands of other highly complex interventions. All were performed under the influence of Tsusensan. His clinic in Hirata, once an object of suspicion and slander, transformed into a beacon of hope, a true center of pilgrimage. Patients traveled weeks, sometimes months, from all corners of Japan. They were driven not by blind faith in dogmas, but by a vivid, undeniable hope for healing without agony. They came because they heard stories from those who had already undergone the procedures and seen the results with their own eyes. His students, numbering over 1,000, carried his knowledge across the entire archipelago. They opened their own clinics, applying Tsusensan and strictly adhering to Hanaoka's empirical methods. These individuals were living proof that his discovery was not an accident, not sorcery, but science. Traditional schools, clinging to ancient texts and centuries-old rituals, watched as their authority waned. Their claims of sorcery and heresy rang hollow against the undeniable facts of successful operations and thousands of lives saved. This was not a single lawsuit or a loud public dispute. It was a verdict delivered by reality itself, one that could not be disputed. The sheer volume of his triumphs, the irrefutable evidence of patients' recovery, silenced even the loudest critics. His methods ceased to be suspicious. They became the norm, a model to emulate. Influential daimyo, who had previously only protected him from attacks, now actively promoted his work, allocating resources for cultivating herbs and building new clinics. They saw him not merely as a healer, but as a visionary, understanding that his contribution was not only saving individual lives, but also a boon for their entire people, strengthening their rule through the well-being of their subjects. By the time of his death in 1856, Seishu Hanaoka was not merely a respected surgeon, he had become a legend. His name was uttered with reverence. He transformed the very concept of surgical intervention in Japan. He proved that the scalpel could be not an instrument of torture, but a means of mercy and salvation. He created a legacy of knowledge, a school of thought, and an entire generation of surgeons who followed in his footsteps, continuing his work. He didn't just discover anesthesia, he embedded it into the fabric of Japanese medicine, decades before the West realized its full potential, laying the groundwork for humane and effective surgery of the future. His legacy was measured not only by the lives he saved. It transformed the very fabric of surgery itself. Before Hanaoka, an operation was a race against death. The surgeon worked at maximum speed, striving to complete the intervention in mere minutes. Cauterization with red-hot iron or boiling oil remained the primary method of stopping bleeding. This was brutal, ineffective, and often led to shock or infection. With the advent of Tsusensan, treatment protocols were transformed. Surgeons gained precious time. They could work unhurriedly, meticulously. Instead of searing wounds, they carefully ligated blood vessels, reducing blood loss and the risk of infection. This enabled operations previously considered impossible. The removal of deeply situated tumors, complex reconstructive interventions, all became a reality. Survival rates, though not recorded in the modern sense, spoke for themselves. Before Hanaoka, operations like the removal of extensive breast tumors were a death sentence. Patients either died on the table from shock and pain, or shortly after from sepsis. Hanaoka performed over 150 such operations, and the vast majority of his patients survived. This was not merely a success, it was a breakthrough that meant thousands of people gained a chance at life rather than a tormented death. Institutionally, his impact was colossal. Hanaoka's clinic ceased to be merely a place of treatment. It became a model. His students, numbering over 1,000, didn't just adopt the Tsusensan recipe. They mastered a system of surgery. They learned anesthesia dosage, patient monitoring during sleep, and new, more gentle operating techniques. They learned about sterility as much as was possible in that era, understanding the importance of clean instruments and hands. These insights, these standards, spread throughout Japan. Every graduate of his school became a proponent of a new surgical culture. Previously, every surgeon operated at their own risk, relying on personal experience or outdated scrolls. Now, thanks to Hanaoka, a unified methodology emerged. Common principles appeared. Surgery began to transform from a craft where mastery was measured by the speed of torture into a genuine science, where precision and compassion became the main criteria. This marked the dawn of a new era, where pain ceased to be the inevitable companion of the scalpel, and the hope for healing became a tangible reality for millions. This new era, born in Japan, was meant to encompass the entire world. But Seishu Hanaoka, decades ahead of his time, achieved his breakthrough within the confines of an isolated nation. His method, his school, thousands of lives saved. All this was an undeniable triumph that transformed surgery from an act of desperation into an act of mercy. However, while Europe sought its light bulbs and eurekas, the true revolution was happening far away, behind closed borders. This is the paradox of his legacy. The greatest discovery, capable of freeing millions from suffering, remained invisible to the rest of the world for decades. But herein lies his universal lesson. True progress does not always announce itself loudly. It is forged in persistent, often unseen labor, in thousands of failures, in the unwavering faith of one person who refused to accept that pain must be a part of healing. The story of Seishu Hanaoka is not merely an account of the creation of the first anesthetic. It is a hymn to human compassion, persistence, and quiet heroism that changes the world, even if the world doesn't immediately recognize it.